Thank you very much. So, Shield is AIM listed, as has just been said. We prepared this pack covering February. We had a market cap of about 59 million at the end of January. We're now up to about 65 million. Our primary focus is on developing and commercializing a product called Feraccru, which is for the treatment of iron deficiency. It's a very novel treatment. Commercially, we have already out-licensed that to Norgine, which is a private pharmaceutical company which sells and markets around Europe. They also have a presence in Australia and New Zealand. We have submitted a US new drug application, the so-called PDUFA date, which is when the FDA say they will give us an answer to the review, is the 27th of July of this year. And in the background, we have another late-stage asset, which partly because this company is, as you'll see in a minute, something of a recovery stock, and we had a very difficult year last year. Development of that stopped for a while, but we're starting to put some energy back into that now. We are a semi-virtual company. There's only 15 employees. About half of that is what I would describe as the more senior management and a fairly experienced team there. When we did that Norgine deal last September, we brought in £11 million as an upfront payment, and that means that we are comfortably funded into 2020. Whenever we present, we find we need to tell people about the last 12 months, and you can see there that 12 months ago, or just over 12 months ago, we were riding high with a share price of over £1, and the day that a clinical study into chronic kidney disease results came out, that price dropped, as you can see, fell off a cliff, and then settled for a while at around sort of 15, 20 pence. The issue there was a very unfortunate set of circumstances. The reality has been, and I can come to this later, is that the drug itself was absolutely fine, and the study, when all the work had been done to understand it, produced exactly the results that we wanted. So there was because of the way that the news came out, and obviously as a public company we had to announce it, people lost confidence. So the investment proposition really at the bottom here is that this is a recovery stock, and that the recovery of the business from the consequences of that initial announcement of the chronic kidney disease has not yet been fully reflected in the share price. And what you can see as you go from left to right there is that although that the announcement came out on 5th of February, on the 16th of March, the full analysis had been done, and that showed, in fact, that the study had succeeded in meeting all its primary endpoints. But at that stage, I guess the market was pretty fed up with the company and had been let down, and so there was no sort of immediate recovery. At the end of March, the European Union actually extended the usage for which we can, the indication for which we're allowed to use Feraccru. Previously, it had been limited to people with inflammatory bowel disease in Europe, suffering from anemia. At the end of March last year, the European Union extended that approval to treating all iron deficiency in adults, whether or not you had anemia. So that increases the market substantially. Moving further along, in September, we licensed the drug to Norgine, and that gave a huge amount of credibility. I think people felt that this drug was a wreck drug, but in fact, Norgine came along and they gave us £11 million up front. I've got more details on this later, and various development milestones and sales milestones, and a healthy royalty. But you can see there the share price still barely moved. And then through the fourth quarter, we announced that we had filed our application for the US, and in mid-December, the FDA told us that they'd accepted our filing and confirmed that that PDUFA date for the review would be in July of this year. And it's really, we put all this bits of the jigsaw, if you like, the company back together again. And then I think having done that, we said, we've really, you can imagine the investor relations activity after that disaster was, if it existed at all. By the way, I joined the company in August, so I wasn't around at that time, but it was damage limitation. We've now got the story to tell, and we've started to tell it in the last few months. And actually the closing share price today was around 56 pence, market cap of about 65 million. So we're starting to see a recognition of that this company has got some value in it. Let me tell you a bit about iron deficiency and how Feraccru fits into that. So one of the things that you get from iron deficiency is anemia. It's low levels of red blood cells and hemoglobin, And there's a variety of symptoms of anemia, which you probably recognise, and some which maybe you won't, but it's a widespread condition. And a lot of anemia comes at the point at the bottom comes from iron deficiency, and you treat iron deficiency with iron replacement therapy. So iron deficiency is the most common cause of anemia. Iron is required for multiple functions in your body, but in particular for the levels of hemoglobin. And a deficiency occurs when you're not absorbing enough iron through your food, or if you're losing iron through blood loss. And so malnutrition, bleeding, and those sort of things come up in various chronic diseases, and in particular inflammatory bowel disease and chronic kidney disease. And in those two areas, we've done clinical studies which demonstrate the effectiveness of Feraccru. And these are IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, CKD, chronic kidney disease, are significantly prevalent diseases. And these charts go from 2017 to 2035. 2035 because we have patent protection for our drug out to 2035. But you can see today on the left-hand market, we're talking about around about 15 million patients with these two diseases in the 5 biggest European markets and the US, and growing steadily with aging, population growth, and so on. So these are in themselves are substantial markets, but this is only a subset of the entire iron deficiency arena. So you can treat iron deficiency either orally or intravenously. Essentially, the oral products historically are salt-based compounds. They're inexpensive, they're convenient, but they tend. What happens is you take an oral salt, it will break down as it goes through the gut, and you end up with sort of iron effectively clumping in your gut and causing constipation, nausea, vomiting, and affecting the lining of the gut. And as a result, the oral salts are pretty poorly tolerated, which creates obviously an issue for those people. Now, for more severe cases, you can go on to intravenous, but that requires literally a direct injection of an iron product into your blood supply. You have to go into hospital for that. You can have a very significant reaction to it. It can be quite dangerous. So the products themselves are expensive, and obviously the hospitalization costs are both inconvenient and expensive as well. And you can see there in terms of market volume, because virtually everybody will go on to the oral treatment initially, that's where the big volume is. But in terms of pricing, most of the oral products at the moment are generic pricing, and the intravenous product on the right-hand side, the lighter grey colour, essentially about half the market in value terms come through the intravenous treatment because of the pricing of those products, which are mainly patented products. So why is Feraccru novel? In what way is it novel? So what I said a moment ago, that the salts break down as they go through the gut, and so you lose a lot of the iron before it gets to where it needs to. You can be treated. An iron salt tablet can contain 200 or 300 milligrams of iron, and a lot of that doesn't get absorbed where it needs to be. Feraccru is different. Feraccru is an Fe3 plus ion surrounded by 3 essentially sugar molecules, maltol. And they bind very, very tightly until it gets close to in the duodenum, where most of the iron gets absorbed, when the strength of this natural body process is strong enough to pull the iron out of that conglomeration, and it pulls it into the body, and then the body uses it as it needs to. And the maltol, which is essentially a sugary stuff, which is actually used quite often in the food industry, simply gets discharged through the body in a natural way. So there are really very, very few side effects from this treatment, and most of the iron that we give in the capsule gets to where it needs to. And as a result, I said 200 or 300 milligrams for an iron salt tablet. Our capsules are 30 milligrams, so we're giving far less iron. So where do we position Feraccru in the sort of overall treatment? So you get a patient treatment with iron deficiency. Pretty much all of them will initially go on to oral iron, and some, going down this route, will be tolerant. And because the drugs are cheap, fine, let those people that work. If it works for them, we're not going to try and capture that market. But if you're intolerant, and some studies say that ranges from 50 to 70% of the patients, so a huge population, you've got 2 choices. Either you give up and you just put up with your symptoms, whatever they are, or you go down the intravenous route, which, as I say, is expensive, inconvenient, and unpleasant. So what we are now being able to offer with Feraccru is two alternatives. Either instead of giving up, take Feraccru, so that sort of grows the market, or instead of going down the intravenous route, take Feraccru, which should enable us to take some of the intravenous market. And we are aiming to price, and Norgine, our commercial partners in Europe, are pricing this at around the same price as the intravenous product. So we're not priced at generic rates, prices. We're priced at the higher intravenous product rates. But of course, we're saving the system all the costs of hospitalization and so on. So we can offer a good economic case, even though we're charging those sorts of rates. And just down here to note, as I mentioned earlier on, patent protection out to 2035. Clinical studies. The first clinical study the company did was in inflammatory bowel disease. The top chart shows you what happened over the 12 weeks, which was where we got to the primary endpoint. And that basically says that we got the sort of increase in hemoglobin that you need from 11 up to 13 or 14, which is the sort of level where you're normalizing and stabilizing. So we saw a very relevant increase in hemoglobin over the 12 weeks. And then the middle chart is over the 54-week follow-up for this one. And you can see there that the levels are sustained out over that period. And the bottom chart basically says it's well tolerated. The blue is Feraccru, the red is placebo, and we had similar sorts of adverse effects during the study to a placebo. This is the detailed story of the chronic kidney disease study, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into this, but this is how we what happened and how we retrieved the situation. Essentially, what caused the damage was we got top-line data out of the clinical research organization that conducted the study, and that top-line data masked the fact that some of the patients who had been treated with Feraccru actually had severe blood losses towards the end, and therefore their hemoglobin levels suddenly went down. And some of the patients who were being treated by placebo, who weren't improving, because of other effects, they had to be treated with emergency intravenous or other therapy, so their hemoglobin went up. In the initial data, we couldn't see any of that. All we saw was there wasn't much difference between the two products at the end of the study. Once we'd adjusted for those confounding events, actually the separation was right. So Feraccru actually delivered a much better result than the placebo. But it was only after those 6 weeks, towards the middle to end of March last year, when all that full information was seen. And actually, recently we've published some the long-term data from the study, and this is the original data for the 12 weeks. And so you can see here that after correcting, the benefits at week 8 maintained themselves out to week 16. In the top-line data, this all disappeared. So that was the puzzle. It was great here, and it had all disappeared by week 16. But what you can see in the long-term follow-up is these are the patients who were originally on Feraccru, going out to 16 weeks. These were the patients originally on placebo, and after the 16 weeks, we were allowed to move the placebo patients onto Feraccru, and you can see they then reacted in exactly the same way as the Feraccru arm had done 16 weeks earlier. So really good, nice long-term evidence that this is a valuable product.
Tim, you've got about 4 minutes.
Okay. We've got some other studies going on at the moment. The main one, there are two here. The bottom one is a phase 3 pediatric study, which the European authorities have asked us to do. At the moment, we're only approved for adults. This will allow us, if it's successful, to go right down into treating children. The one in the middle, the head-to-head study, this actually is going to report by the end of this quarter, so it's going to be news sometime fairly soon. And this is where it's not a regulatory study. The regulators ask you to essentially compare your drug against placebo. This is where we've gone head-to-head against the market-leading intravenous product, because what we want to try and demonstrate is that actually if you treat your patient with your oral Feraccru, it's as good as treating them with the intravenous treatment. And clearly from a marketing point of view and a pricing point of view, that could be a valuable result to get. But if we don't get it, it's not a disaster because, as I say, it doesn't impact the approvals. In terms of European commercialisation, I mentioned we've licensed it to Norgine. We got an £11 million up front. We're entitled, if we have success, to an extra 54 million euros in both the mix of development and sales milestones, and we will get royalties ranging from 25% to 40%. I won't go into this much detail, but Norgine are a very credible company. Then they're sort of mid-size. We didn't want one of the giants because, frankly, this product probably wouldn't be interesting enough to them. But Norgine are highly motivated, and they already operate with the same sort of doctors and so on who you need to promote these sorts of drugs to. We retain responsibility for manufacturing, future development, and of course we own the the overarching intellectual property. In the US, we filed, and we'll get an answer around the end of July, unless the government has another close down over there. And commercialising, we're most likely to out-license the product there as well. In terms of financial headlines, we put out an unaudited trading statement in January. 11.9 million of revenues in 2018, of which 11 million was that upfront that we received. Cash of nearly 10 million at the end of the year, with a cash runway going into 2020. In terms of news flow, we've got those head-to-head study data coming out quite soon. We've got the PDUFA date for the US in 27th of July, and the start of the paediatric study. We're still doing the preparatory work for it at the moment, designing the protocol. We need to find and appoint a contract research organisation to do the work for us. But that should start in the second half of the year. And then ongoing, we are continuing to look at out-licensing. So there's the US, which in due course, hopefully we'll be able to do a licensing deal for, but also other territories outside the US and Europe. So key messages and investment highlights. This is a major market, and there are significant unmet needs because of the tolerability issues. Feraccru is novel in the way that it works. We've got the US coming. We've got other parts of the world coming. We've got a fairly healthy cash position, and we believe we have a valuation upside as a result of the calamity that happened last year, and we've got. And we're now covered by Peel Hunt and Liberum, who are our brokers. And Liberum actually recently updated their note and put a price of, I think it's about £1.10 on us, including the US opportunity. Peel Hunt put a note out at the time of the Norgine deal, and they said 70 to 80 pence, excluding the US, and you can double that if you get the US approval and licensing deal. And also Edison cover us. They've got 150 for the total business, including the US. So you can see there that all those analysts think, compare that with today's share price of 56p, that there's a healthy upside. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions from the audience. There's one over there.
I apologise, our Chief Medical Officer was going to come with me, but he unfortunately wasn't able to. So your more medical questions, I'm afraid I'm probably not going to be able to answer.
Okay, have you got any guidance you can give us on pricing and what Norgine is saying about the price they can achieve? And second part to the question is, what kind of distribution capability does Norgine have in the United States?
So pricing, Norgine don't have any real presence in the United States, so it's pretty unlikely we'll do a deal with them in the US. In terms of pricing in Europe, it's around the sort of €2. It varies from country to country. At the moment, we're only launched. The product is only launched in the UK and Germany, because traditionally those are the markets where you can go to and you can set your own price. And as far as the other big European markets, France, Spain, and Italy, typically there you have to go through a price negotiation before you can launch. Norgine have said, and there's an element of crossing your fingers here, we don't want to go and have those pricing discussions until we've seen the head-to-head data, because if we get good head-to-head data, then we can argue for a better price. But I think you're looking at the sort of €2 per day mark for the treatment, and the treatment is 2 30 milligram capsules per day.
Could I just ask then, as far as the US is concerned, assuming that the FDA does accept the product and admit it to market, who you'll be looking for a distribution partner there as well?
We will. Yep. And that's a process that's underway, but it's still early yet, and I don't think we would want to conclude irrevocably a deal before, and I don't think the other party would want to conclude a deal before we get their approval one way or the other.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question over there, Donald.
Can you tell us a bit about where your costs are going and what the variables are, please?
Yep. So a bit when the at the time that the data problem happened a year ago, the company had set its heart on commercializing for itself, certainly in Europe, and had started to build commercial organisations in the UK and Germany because those were the first markets. The day all this happened, the share price collapsed. The company was relatively short of cash, and just took the view that it could no longer support those commercial organisations. So it took out all the selling and commercial organisation, and along with that downsized the back office and so on. So I can't point you to an exact number at the moment in terms of looking at 2017 or 2018, because the costs were coming down like that. That said, we've probably got a general and admin sort of cost of running the business in the region of about £5 million. The variable is how much R&D cost do we put on top of that, and I'm afraid that bounces around all over the place. During the course of 2019, we've got the tail end of the costs from the head-to-head study, and still some residual costs from the chronic kidney disease study, because we did the follow-up. We will have, towards the second half of the year, we will have the paediatric costs beginning to start. And in the meantime, we've got some formulation work we're doing. So, for example, for the paediatric study, we can't ask small children to take capsules. We're going to have to give them a liquid. So we're formulating that at the moment. So I'm afraid the R&D piece is a bit of a moving piece. But you've got the sort of underlying bedrock at the moment of costs to keep the business running and so on, of about 5 million plus on top of that, R&D costs.
Thank you.
Okay, is there a final question? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Tim.